Welcome everyone to today's Rare Birds Mentor Lab, From Here to Equality, How You Can Make an Impact. This is the first in our Diversity and Allyship series. My name is Tegan and I'm the Partnerships and Community Manager at Inspiring Rare Birds. And today I am joined by Darshana Parekh, who is a seasoned inclusion consultant and commercial lawyer. To begin, and in the spirit of reconciliation, Rare Birds would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, and I would like to recognise the Awabakal people, the traditional custodians of where I'm broadcasting from today, and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. For those the Inspiring Rare Birds community, our mission is to support and promote diversity and inclusion, where opportunities in entrepreneurship and leadership exist equally for everyone. We are best known for our mentoring programs, but we also offer a range of educational masterclasses. We host online and in-person events, providing people with the opportunity to build their networks and grow with the Rare Birds community. If you'd like to learn more, please indicate your interest in the survey at the end of today's sessions, or you can reach out to me or anyone on the Rare Birds team. If you would like to connect today, feel free to use the chat function over on the right-hand side to introduce yourself, comment and connect with others. You'll also see a Q&A tab, and feel free to pop in any questions you have for Darshana, and we will be answering them at the end of today's session. Now I'd like to introduce Darshana, who brings a unique blend of legal rigour, inclusive leadership and strategic clarity to the diversity, equity and inclusion space. Her DEI work spans gender equity, intersectionality, government reform and inclusive leadership. Darshana is committed to helping leaders move from awareness to action and designing workplaces that are fit for the future and not limited by the past. Welcome, Darshana.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tegan, for that very warm introduction. And I am very, very glad to be here. Excuse me. You'll have to bear with me as I am recovering from a cold at this time of year. I would also like to extend my acknowledgement to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on whose unceded lands I am dialing in from, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that acknowledgement to anyone of First Nations backgrounds who's joining us on this call. So I thought it'd be really important to go through what it is that I will be talking about today, which will be a very short history lesson on why we are where we are when it comes to diversity, equity and inclusion practices in Australia, talking and understanding about privilege and how that's not a dirty word. We'll run through why the myth of meritocracy is just that, a myth. And most importantly, we'll be going through some practical solutions about what's in and what's out when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Today's session is about curiosity and growth. You may come across concepts that make you uncomfortable, and I invite you to continue listening. My hope is that you leave today with at least one new insight and one action that you can take as a mentor and as a leader within your community. So why is DEI important? It's important for all the reasons listed up on the screen, which I won't read to you. But we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not about performance. It's about creating spaces where all people have a fair shot to contribute and thrive, and where systemic barriers are removed and not reinforced. So, how did we get here? We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is important. We know that it's great for teams, great for leaders, and great for emerging leaders as well. And yet, so often we feel stuck. Perhaps we've tried to help someone. Perhaps we've tried to help ourselves, and we just feel like we can't move forward. So to ground us in the why, it is very important for us to look back. Australia's history on inclusion is not great. We had the White Australia policy from 1901 until 1970, 70 years. And while laws like the Racial Discrimination Act and the Sex Discrimination Act were critical milestones, we all know that laws alone don't create culture. Thankfully, laws have changed since then, but the systemic impacts of historical bias continue to influence workplace norms and outcomes. And to give you context, up on that screen is the 2025 Board Diversity Index, authored by Watermark International, the AICD, and Deloitte. And on the screen, you'll be able to see that about 8% of all board directors in the ASX 300 are of non-Anglo-Celtic background. You'll be able to see that those from an Indigenous or Aboriginal background only make up, there are only 4 or 5 directors in the ASX 300 of that background, and there is no one of a disability, or at least a disability that they have disclosed on the ASX 300 board at all. And this is a direct impact of those laws that we've had in place and the slowness at which those laws are having an impact. But there is more to this story about why things might not be changing the way we want them to, or as quickly as we want them to. Up on the screen is a tool that I like to use called the Wheel of Privilege. It's a very simple way to reflect on how close or how far we are each from systemic power based on factors we earned and did not earn. Things that we don't earn are aspects like our race, gender, physical and mental ability, and sexual identity, to name a few. The wheel is a direct consequence of laws and policies that have tried to be equal but have not been equitable in practice. As a reminder, equality and equity are not the same thing. Equality means every person, regardless of their background, should be receiving the same pay for the same work. Equity enables the changing of systems and structures, like introducing workplace flexibility, to ensure every person has the same chance to succeed in their role. Now, it's really important to remember that we all have privilege of some sort, whether we've earned it or have not earned it. It's about recognizing that privilege shapes how we experience opportunity. I'm going to repeat that because that's really, really important as we move forward in this session. Privilege is about recognizing how we experience opportunity. And the more aware we are of it, the more consciously we can lead and mentor. Now, while I have you here, I want you to take a moment to look at the wheel and ask yourself, where do you sit on this wheel? And what's one truth you might be unwilling or have been unwilling to face about how privilege has played a role in your success or in the barriers that others may face? Now, you don't have to put anything in the chat, but I do ask you to take 30 seconds to have a think about that wheel. And that wheel is available online, and I am happy to share my slides to all participants after this call as well. The term intersectionality and intersecting identities are often used interchangeably. Excuse me. They are not the same thing. Intersecting identities is the concept that an individual's identity consists of multiple intersecting factors. For example, gender, race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, and sexual identity. Intersectionality refers to the different levels of power or oppression faced by an individual in any given context. In essence, intersectionality is a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. In any given context are the words that I would like for you to focus on. Because in any given context, you may or you may not have power. When a person walks into a room Observe their behaviors and how they might interact, how you interact with others as well. You may have power when you walk into one room, and when you leave that room and walk down the hallway into the other office space, you may not have the same power. So when you hear the phrase, we need to apply an intersectional approach to our workplace and workplace practices, what that means is understanding how the current biases in our systems and behaviors can impact an individual who is not as close to the center of the wheel of privilege, which was on the previous slide, and how that impacts their access to opportunity. Now, as mentors and leaders, this is critical because we often advise people whose lived experiences we may not share. And the most inclusive mentors are those who ask, listen, and create space for those different experiences to be seen and valued. I'd like to take a moment because this is a really strong point that I would like to reinforce. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a continuing practice, not a series of policies. It takes more than just pieces of paper to change workplace practices. In my work as an inclusion consultant, this is often the starting point for a lot of organizations, which is wonderful. It's wonderful that we can use a piece of paper that is meant to be applied to everyone. However, a piece of paper is worth nothing if we don't embed practices that continue to change and iterate in order to create equitable practices across an organization. And I know that there are people who will often say things like, we're quite nervous, we're a bit scared, we don't know what the impact of this change will be, and we don't want to offend anyone. To which I would say that doing nothing and keeping silent is far more dangerous. When we do nothing, it is an acceptance of behaviors and the status quo in which we are willing to keep. And we send a clear message to the people around us when we do nothing and accept that in our fear, we would rather sit back and allow others to perform in a way that we may not necessarily agree with. So I would urge all of you to think of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a practice, something that can be included in your everyday tasks and everyday workplaces that are not dependent on policies alone. So I've asked for a single takeaway at the beginning of this webinar. Excuse me. And this is what I would love for you to take away. I would love for you to challenge the myth of meritocracy. One of the most persistent myths in corporate Australia is this, that if you work hard enough, if you've studied hard enough, you land the right job, and you do what needs to be done, you'll get ahead. But this assumes everyone starts from the same place, with the same access to opportunity, free of bias and systemic barriers. And we know that is simply not the case. As mentors and leaders, we must challenge the myth of meritocracy. We must ask, is this person being assessed fairly, or are hidden or not so hidden biases shaping decisions about them? So what might this look like in a workplace? There are 3 biases up on the slide that I have seen in a workplace. They are the affinity bias, the proximity bias, and benevolent prejudice. These biases reinforce the myth of meritocracy. I'm going to read the examples out of each bias and see how I want you to tell me in the chat if you are willing to do so. If you've heard any of these being applied to you, if you've applied them, or perhaps your colleagues have said that these comments have come their way. So affinity bias is the tendency to favor people who are close to power. So quite literally those who are close to the CEO or CFO or their manager. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm leaning quite close into this. Oh, no, sorry, I take that back. That's a mistake. So affinity bias, excuse me, is a tendency to favor people who share similar interests, background, and experiences. So in this case, we might hire someone who comes from the same university or the same school because we associate with them. Proximity bias is what I was referring to earlier. This is the bias that those who are sitting close to people in power are automatically seen as competent. This disproportionately affects those part-timers who are working from home and or those people who work from home for any particular reason, whether for caring responsibilities, whether they have a visible or invisible disability, or whether because they choose to. And the example you might hear of this in play in a workplace is something like this. I've got a project coming up and Chris is always around. I actually think he'd be really, really good for the job. So that doesn't take into account anyone who's not present, or at least not visibly present, and it also doesn't take into account accomplishments. Benevolent prejudice is one that will be very common to anyone who has caring responsibilities, particularly mothers. And it sounds something like this. Oh, Divya would be great for that new upcoming committee, but she's got kids and she's probably not going to be interested. So who else do we have? In that scenario, Divya was not given the opportunity to access that opportunity, nor was she given the opportunity to deny it, which means we have taken away her agency and autonomy without even giving her the chance to talk through how she might be a good fit, what workplace adjustments are needed in order for her to be a part of this committee, and how it might help or work into her KPIs. Okay, this is the good slide. I've spoken to you about really key concepts as to why things may not be going as fast as you would want them to. And it's really important to understand these because it means we can get practical about what's in and what's out. So, what's out are performative measures. Those things that look good on Instagram, on LinkedIn, the cupcakes, we've seen them all, but they simply don't work. They're not practical, they are not going to have a sustainable impact on employees, and they are not going to change the status quo. There's a few items up on that screen. The one that I would really like to focus on in terms of what's out, because I'll be focusing on what's in, is the taps on the shoulder. So in the examples that I gave previously when it came to the biases, proximity, affinity, and benevolent prejudice, it is the taps on the shoulder, the ones where people get promoted without having a clear pathway accessible to anyone else. They're the ones that are most toxic. They create resentment within workplaces, and they do not give access to opportunities. Now, what's in is really important as well. We have to look at pay equity, and not just because WGEA tells us to. We have to ensure we have psychosocial safety in place. And whilst we do have an update in laws about that, It's also got to do with what I'm about to speak to, which is the clear and transparent promotion pathways. We need to be looking at systems-focused changes that focus on processes, practices, and norms. Now, why that's important is because we do not ever want to guilt or shame anyone into creating these changes. We always think about creating culture through systems because systems change behaviors and behaviors impact culture, which in turn leads to KPIs that reward actionable and inclusive behaviors. So what are your managers doing? What are you doing to create inclusive environments? Are you updating job descriptions so that the language is quite neutral? We know that we have a tendency to use masculine-based traits when writing up job descriptions. When someone is being onboarded, are we giving them all the information that they need, including access to policies like parental leave, so that they don't feel shamed or they don't feel as though they need to keep it a secret? Are we giving people access, or are we rewarding good behavior by ensuring that managers are given the opportunity to elevate their team in a clear and transparent way? And are we helping those managers create those pathways so that they are constantly iterating and changing how they interact with their teams? Clear and transparent promotion pathways. This is extremely important if we are to change what diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like in corporate workplaces. Sponsorship and allyship, and of course, meaningful mentorship like what Rarebirds is doing right now. This slide is from the 2025 Future of Jobs published by the World Economic Forum. And the reason I like it is because it's listing the top 5 skills that are going to be needed over the next 10 years. Number 1 in all of that is analytical thinking. And I suspect many people in this call or those watching later will be analytical thinkers. But it's perhaps the ones that come afterwards that are of most curiosity to me. Resilience, flexibility, and agility. Leadership and social influence. Creative thinking and motivation and self-awareness. Now, these skills are all absolutely necessary if we are to create diversity, equity, and inclusive practices that are long-term and sustainable. If we are to become really inclusive, then we must become creative. I mentioned earlier that in our silence, we will protect the status quo. And in protecting the status quo, we will not become resilient. We will not be exercising skills that our future workplace and our future employees will be looking to us for. I'll close with this. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a checkbox. It's not a compliance task. It's a practice. A continuing commitment to learning, listening, and taking action. As mentors and leaders, you have influence. The stories you tell, the advice you give, the networks you open, all of these can either widen or narrow the path for someone else. My mission is to help people have courageous conversations and drive equitable change. I hope today you leave with a little more courage, a little more curiosity, and at least one action you can take from here to equality. I'd love to be able to connect with you, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to me on Instagram. And I know that we do have a series of questions that people have submitted, so I'd love to be able to get through those and give the audience some time to also chat with me and ask any questions that they might have.
Thanks, Darshana. There was some amazing insights in there. And if you do have a question for Darshana, don't forget to pop it over in the chat and we can definitely get that answered for you. We did have some questions that were submitted before today's session. So I think we'll start having a little bit of a chat about those, Darshana. You covered a lot of different areas that that people need to consider for diversity and inclusion, they range everything from cultural to gender. But what other considerations are there? How does a person or an organisation ensure that they're covering, as much as they can in this space?
That's a really good question. And yes, we do tend to focus on race and gender because they are visible and because there are compliance pieces in place, particularly with WGIA. So, of course, there's going to be a higher focus on that. There is evidence to say that when we do focus on making workplaces better for women, overall we make workplaces better for everyone else simply because of the virtue of numbers. So whilst we might be underrepresented, at any given point we represent 48 to 52% of the population. What other factors that are really coming to play at the moment is a few things, two key examples I can think of. One of which is based on disabilities, so visible and invisible disabilities. So by that I mean those, for example, functioning with autism or ADHD. There can also be things like chronic fatigue syndrome. And the other aspect that comes to mind is women who are going through fertility issues and those who are going through perimenopause and menopause. There's often a really, well, not often to be honest, there is stigma attached to both these aspects of someone's identity that they might be going through. And so for me, there's a really big question about, well, how do we make sure that we are talking to performance and impact of performance rather than the person and what they're doing, which in turn ties in with presenteeism. So I'm a huge advocate of how do we make sure we are enacting flexible workplace practices to ensure that we're focusing on the person who is doing the work in the best way that they possibly can, rather than focusing on, well, here's 9:30 and this person isn't even in their chair, when the truth is they may operate better from 11 to 2 p.m. and be able to pump out their deep thinking work in that time.
Yes, there is a lot to consider, but it's really making sure it's people first, really, yes. A kind of a mindset to make it very simple, I suppose. Another question was, what are some tactical, practical steps that can be taken that don't rely on policy? So, what actions can managers take to influence positive outcomes here?
Yes, that's a really good question, and I really like it because there are two aspects to that. One of which is, if you're an emerging leader, you, of course, always seek the title, always seek the pay rise in your formal KPIs and formal discussions. However, in between that time, do not rely on the title or the anticipation of the title to act like a leader and display leadership qualities. Excuse me. And by that, I mean you are able to enact inclusive practices and behaviors through the way you conduct yourself at work. And for managers, excuse me, for managers, I would say the biggest practical takeaway would be to conduct pay audits. So, oh, that cough is not going to leave me. So pay audits are exceptionally important because that if you can tie them into what a person is doing in terms of their work and the impact they are having and connect it to their aspirations, you'll find that managers will start to look at how they can elevate this person and what they might do to create a pathway for them that is rooted in fact rather than rooted in stereotypes or what they think a person should be doing based on how they look or what they might have said in terms of what they're going through in their personal or professional life. So if I could give another takeaway, which is that record the promotion pathways. make it really, really clear. And if you're an emerging startup or you don't know what that is, as I said, don't remain silent. Try it out. Put the promotion pathway up there, and if someone says, actually, I've done more than this, or I don't believe this is needed, continually adjust, because you'll find that once people can see what they need to grow in their role or into the next role, there will be clearer assessments over the year as this person moves into that aspiration. And more importantly, they will be able to talk to their manager about what opportunities are needed to elevate their skills or to grow new skills in order to get into that role. And that's what that transparency piece does, is that it really levels out the level playing field, and it means that someone does not walk into a workplace and go, oh, well, I'm not best friends with the director over there, which means I'm never going to receive that promotion.
So you mentioned in there not to stay silent if you're unsure of what you should be doing. And you said startup space, but I guess particularly in any space, if someone's a little unsure of how they should be moving forward, are there courses, are there qualifications around the DEI space that people could participate in, or are there any avenues that they can take to learn more about it?
There aren't any specific courses that I am aware of. However, there are some really good resources out there. So the one I'm thinking of is called Catalyst. They're a Canadian-based organization that does a lot of research into the diversity, equity, and inclusion field. They've got some great papers out there, including on sponsorship and mentorship. So that is very, very helpful. And then what I referenced earlier as well in terms of, I know it may not sound like something that diversity, equity, and inclusion means, but the World Economic Forum always publishes a Future of Jobs report. And the skills that are listed in that report are often very much required of DEI practitioners or allies. And then the final one I can think of is most recently Deloitte published the 2025 Millennial and Gen Z report, which I would encourage everyone to read as well, because that really taps into the next generation or the up and coming generation. I'm a millennial myself, and it speaks to essentially why reward as, being bags at work or ping pong tables at work, why that is performative, and how for a lot of the up and coming generation, it really is about reward and recognition at work, but also learning and development. So that concept of mentorship and sponsorship is really important to younger and emerging leaders, because they want to know that they are going to be invested in, rather than having a workplace to come to that seems cool or fun. So I found that to be quite insightful from a next generation point of view, and particularly important for anyone who is managing a younger team.
Yeah, amazing. And if someone was interested in moving into the space of becoming a consultant or an advisory person, where do you even start with that?
It starts with yourself. So understanding what it is or why it is that you're doing this. So ensuring that this pathway for you is not one that is, it is positive. So making sure that you are very well grounded in yourself. You understand that you yourself might have biases, and that understanding, looking after yourself as a DEI practitioner is really, really important. So there will be times when you may not be able to help everyone, and ensuring that anytime you walk into an organization, you are not the organization's outsourced conscience. So any organization or person that you work with must have a understanding, and you can help them get to that point, must have an understanding of where they want to be, how they want to be, and why they may or may not be willing to, or why they may not have gotten there. And then coming back to that notion of data as well, asking an organization to look at the recent attractions, promotions, and then exits as well over a period of time, and why the particular patterns might be there as well. And that's what I mean when I say it's performative actions are really not going to help change anyone. And I think Australia has made itself really, really clear in terms of this is still important, and we're not going to throw this concept or these ideas out of the door just because other countries might have. We really are quite grounded in what we want to do and understanding that this is all about sustainability, the sustainability of people, as you mentioned earlier, but also realizing that we have a system in place that is biased, and we are at a point where we are ready and willing to accept that in order to create and break those biases, we have to be willing to create change, no matter how incremental that might be. And I would turn around and say, incremental changes are probably going to be the most sustainable because they will be the ones that you can assess quite quickly. So to be able to say, well, this worked and this didn't, and if it didn't work, we're going to go back and change it, and you've not invested so much time into a particular action. And by the flip side, it also means if you've made an incremental change and it's worked, you've now got a foundation to build upon, which means your next change might be a build on what you have already done and or a sideways step to that foundation. And again, you're just always moving and iterating. And that is what I would say to anyone who wants to move into this field, is that it is the good work is not always the sexy work. It is going to be understanding where an organization wants to be, where they want to move, and how you can help them get there in a way that is going to be impactful for their people and of course for their C-suite as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. To just almost like the slow and steady concept.
Yes.
All right, well, I think I've got one more question to wrap up with. You spoke about how, do the incremental steps to increase, the likelihood of how effective it's going to be. But how does one person or an organization practice inclusion and diversity in their everyday life? So work life, personal life, how do you just start incorporating that into who you are?
Yes, that's a very powerful question, and before I go on, I will always say this. Survival is key, and there is no shame in that. And if you are in a position where you need to look out for your salary, you need to look out for your job, you don't feel safe in your workplace, by all means, that's important. And so you must understand where you sit in your organization and whether your organization is going to be willing and able to accept inclusive practices that you might start to incorporate in your day-to-day. And if you feel as though, to any participant who is watching and who will watch the recording later, if you feel as though you are not ready for that, it does not make you a bad person, because it is really important to remember what I said earlier, which is we can't shame or guilt people into changing their behaviors because we don't know what their story is. We don't know what is going on at any point in life. So now that I've said that proviso, the way we can make changes incrementally in everyday lives is by speaking out and having courageous conversations. And I said earlier that silence is really dangerous, and that applies to an individual as well. If you see behavior that is impacting on someone else, particularly from an underrepresented background, it is really, really powerful to step in a way that is going to be a reassurance to that person. Now, you might not do it the first time around. Perhaps you will go up to that person and say, I saw what happened. I don't agree with it. Would you like to take this further? Because I would be happy to support you. Alternatively, if that happens again and you stand up for yourself, I will also stand up for you. So ensuring that you're doing it in a way that is respectful to that person, simply because we don't know where that person is in terms of their survival. The other way we can do it is exactly what I said earlier, which is we don't need to wait for HR. If you're a manager, you don't need to wait for HR to do these conversations. You can start having conversations with your team members right now about what their aspirations are and be really realistic about it. What their aspirations are, how they'd like to move forward, if they'd like to move forward, and then putting that to paper, putting pen to paper, but then also finding opportunities for team members that include cross-functional conversations. And that's really important from a leadership perspective because it means you're providing visibility to a team member that they may not ordinarily have. And so in that example, you may have someone in a sales team who has said that they'd love to know more about the promotions and how the ROI is impacting on sales. And so you might speak to someone in the marketing team and say, I have a person who is doing really well in their role and they would love an opportunity to learn more about this. Would you have any capacity in any other project that you have up and coming to put this person on? Putting social capital on the line from a leadership perspective is immensely powerful. And it's immensely powerful for those from underrepresented groups. And you can see how, as a manager, if you have knowledge of a team member that other people don't have access to, you can then filter and adjust your behavior to elevate your team member in the best way possible. And that may or may not include understanding that if they do have a visible or invisible disability, that they may require certain adjustments. But you are very, very confident in their capability to do the job. It's just they don't have the confidence perhaps or the leverage to be able to ask for that opportunity. So promotion pathways, sponsorships at a day-to-day level is really, really important if you're a manager. And if you're not a manager, what I said earlier, which is that you don't need to wait for that title to come to you to start acting like a leader, because leadership is a series of behaviors and values. It's not a title. And I think, again, we've seen that in some examples from across the world.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Darshana, for those amazing insights and also for the tips on how to start incorporating this more into our work life, daily life, business life. So thank you for joining us today. Very much appreciated. We did have a survey that just popped up. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Let us know what you thought of today's session. And if there's any other topics that you'd like to hear from Rarebirds, would also like to hear your insights there. If you would like to join the Rarebirds community, either as a mentor or mentee, feel free to reach out to one of the team and we'd be happy to have a chat with you. In the meantime, hope to see you again at another session. And Darshana, thank you again so much for sharing your insights on diversity and inclusion. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.